This is Katie Crystal, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission speaking. We are beginning our November 5th, 2020 meeting at 7:01 p.m. Thank you all for being so prompt. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we are conducting this meeting electronically. Please let it be known that our commission staff followed all of the procedures and guidelines in the enabling legislation. They gave notice to the commission, to the staff, and to the public. And as has been the case, we are being simultaneously broadcast to the public on NVTC's YouTube channel. As we all know, if you could mute your microphone when you're not speaking, that helps us cut down on background noise. We have the chat function available for technical questions, but we really need to refrain from conducting any business or talking about substantive issues in that chat function. And as always with a vote, if you're making the motion, it helps us tremendously if you could identify yourself if you're making or seconding that motion. Okay, we'll begin with roll call for quorum purposes. Madam Secretary, if you could call the roll as well as announce any staff participating tonight.
Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Gary.
Present.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Here.
Mr. Bell.
Here.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Here.
Mr. De Ferenti. Mr. Eben. Ms. Fillercorn. Here. Mr. Faust.
Here.
Ms. Garvey.
Here.
Mr. Krizik.
Here.
Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. Meyer. Ms. Pelchik.
Present. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Mr. Reed.
Present.
Mr. Smedberg. Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Turner. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell. And Mr. Stork is an alternate.
Here.
We have quorum. The
And,
following, I'm
Eben-
sorry?
Well, Eben is here as well.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mr. Eben.
And David Meyer from the city of Fairfax.
Great. Then we definitely have quorum. The following staff are participating in the call. Executive Director Kate Mattice, Director of Finance and Administration Scott Kulkworth, Director of Programs and Policy Alan Fye, NVTC Commission Secretary Rhonda Gilchrist, Web and IT Manager Melissa Walker, WMATA Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Program Analyst Zachary Smith, Commuter Choice Senior Program Manager Ben Owen, Program Analyst Dina Gurma, NVTC Legislative Liaison Amy Perrin-Seibert, NVTC Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac, WMATA's Virginia Government Relations Officer Greg Potts, VRE Chief Executive Officer Rich Dalton, and VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield. Turn it back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gilchrist. All right. I am also going to note that we have regrets from our colleagues in Loudoun who are unable to join us because of a Loudoun County Board meeting moved from Tuesday for obvious reasons. And I'm also going to embarrass my Arlington colleague, Matt DeFerenti, to note that he is not with us this evening because he is on his honeymoon. So please congratulate Commissioner DeFerenti when you have an opportunity. All right, so I trust everyone's had a chance to review the agenda. We have one change. We've heard from VRE staff that we remove or defer rather the action pertaining to the VRE agreement with the City of Manassas Park. We're anticipating they'll bring that back at our December meeting. So in addition to our minutes, we'll have a couple of action items. 2 items on our consent agenda, the electronic meeting resolution, which has become quite familiar to all of us, as well as our report on Virginia's 3% cap on the growth in operating assistance payments to WMATA. We have discussed the 3% cap report so many times that you could be forgiven for thinking we'd already voted on it. So we are going to vote on the final version of that report on the consent agenda, unless anybody would prefer further discussion. We also have a couple of actions on commuter choice this evening. One will be to approve policy changes governing the commuter choice program as recommended by our policy advisory or program advisory committee. And then we have a resolution regarding the technical evaluation process for the 95 through 95 projects and authorizing the call for projects on that round 2, because we are already in the second year, or moving into the second year of that program. So I am going to suggest when they come before us that we create a block vote on those two actions, the policy changes governing commuter choice and the call for projects on 95-395. But of course, we'll have an opportunity for commissioners to separate those out if you'd like to. We'll have a closed session at the end of the meeting to discuss a personnel matter. And again, a summary of that agenda is before you on your screen for reference. Okay, so moving into that consent agenda, we have again the resolution finding the need for an electronic meeting and authorizing Ms. Mattice, our executive director, to send the commission's report on Virginia's 3% cap on the growth in operating assistance to WMATA. The action on our consent agenda is to send that report or authorize Kate to send that report to the chairs of the Virginia House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. Before I ask for a motion, certainly associated with with an electronic meeting, Kate, did we receive any comments from the public for our consideration tonight?
We did not receive any comments.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Senator Bell, so moved.
Second from Ed.
All right, moved by Bell, seconded by Eben. Is there any further discussion on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask our commission secretary to please call the roll for a vote.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Gary,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
And
Mr. Bell.
not being completely selfish, it also is this.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Eben,
Aye.
Ms. Filler Corn,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey, Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchak,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The vote passes.
This is Libby Garvey. I'm not sure if my mute came unmuted. I did vote aye. I don't know
Great.
if it's heard, but I was having trouble with it. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The motion did pass.
Thank you. Okay, we also have before us the minutes of our October 1st meeting. Let's begin by entertaining a motion for approval of the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second, this is David Reed.
All right, moved by Senator Evans, seconded by Delegate Reed. Thank you both. Any discussion, amendments, or issues with the minutes of last month? All right, seeing none, I'll turn it over to our commission secretary to call the roll for a vote. Please respond yay, nay, or abstain.
Chair Crystal,
Yay.
Mr. Gary,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell, Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Eben,
Aye.
Ms. Filler Corn,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
You just say.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchak,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes. I turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Okay, so our substantive action item is to authorize the delay in approving our fiscal 22 general and administrative budget for the commission. This is before us as a recommendation from our executive director to give relief from our usual budget deadlines, which, as you all know, for the commission are well ahead of our jurisdictional deadlines for budget approval. We believe that this can be done and still keep us right on track for fiscal 22 operations next July. but of course will allow for an important additional level of predictability for some funding sources that are really uncertain. So Kate, can I turn it over to you to introduce a little more about what this means?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So indeed, according to the NVTC bylaws, the executive director is to submit the proposed budget for our next fiscal year, initially to the executive committee in advance of January, and then to the full commission in January. And so this again is January for the 6 months later, the following fiscal year. And as one of the things is the majority of the revenues that fund NVTC's operations are actually state aid from our jurisdictions on behalf of our jurisdictions. And so we do rely on the projected revenue from DRPT in determining our budget and then what we report out. And of course, this year, because of so many different changes in the economic uncertainties related to COVID and within the changes in the state budget, we are expecting updated DRPT projections in December. And so we do believe that by waiting till after December to prepare our own general administrative budget, we're going to be able to use the updated projections to develop a budget that has much more certainty as to the state aid that would be able to fund our operations.
Great.
And again, with your approval, we would still be able to provide the administrative budget well in advance of the fiscal year and propose we would actually start introducing it in January for a no later than March approval. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Which would take the unusual step of actually putting the commission on pace with all of our jurisdictions and when we approve our budget. So I think nothing too unfamiliar or any reason for concern. I'm happy to endorse this suggestion and want to provide an opportunity for any questions, comments, or concerns before I ask for a motion. Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve resolution 2423 regarding the budget?
So moved. This is Sullivan.
Great, thank you.
Second, Filler-Corn.
Okay, moved by Sullivan, seconded by Filler-Corn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Gilchrist, could you call the roll or vote?
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre,
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Eben,
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Corn,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
and Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. All right, we will turn to the item of the WMATA. We have a few items this evening, an update on WMATA's COVID response, report from our WMATA board members, and of course, any other WMATA news. As has been our practice, I think it makes sense for us to hold our questions on Metro to the end of each of these three presentations. So if you could do that and help us out, that'd be terrific. Let me actually start by turning to Mr. Smedberg to give us a report as not only the WMATA board member, but the WMATA board chair report for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be somewhat brief this evening. As you know, the situation WMATA is dealing with, as many of the jurisdictions are dealing with, is very challenging financially. Our ridership is down. We have CARES Act that is getting us through federal dollars from the federal government through CARES Act, getting us through to the beginning of the year. But a couple things I do want to highlight. First is we received an update on WMATA's CIP program on October 8th. WMATA is projected to invest nearly $1.9 billion in capital projects, which includes this past summer's platform improvement project at Vienna, Dunloring, West Falls Church, East Falls Church stations. The remaining fiscal year 21 and 22 capital program will continue to focus on safety and the state of good repair. We are not, forgoing any of those projects. We don't want to revert back to where the organization was, a while back that got us into this current state we are now. So we want to keep those projects going, and we have full support of that. Phase 3 and phase 4 of the platform improvement projects, rehabilitating the aerial metro rail structures, replacement of the Rockville Metro rail station canopy, pilot projects to enhance the tunnel ventilation system, the Yellow Line tunnel, and other various projects are all currently underway. We received an update on the fiscal year 22 budget. The potential gap, depending on various factors, but given where we are now with the coronavirus and the numbers we're seeing and the moves that various businesses and the federal government are making, we initially had a range of anywhere of a gap between 167 million and about 350 million. I think it's the board's desire to take a conservative approach, and I think that gap is going to be closer to that 340, 350 range for sure. And that is, and I want people to know, that is in addition to the gap we're dealing with for fiscal year 21. So, the 100 and, or the 200 or so, for 21 would be in addition, that for 22 would be in addition, an additional 300 plus million. So a lot of factors in play, even with the potential of a Biden presidency. Looks like the Republicans are going to keep control of the Senate at this point. The likelihood of a relief package coming during the lame duck is pretty low from what we're hearing from well-placed sources on the Republican and the Democratic side. The majority leader, Senator McConnell, has indicated and put forward, I think it was earlier today, he put forward his $500 billion package, which does not include anything for transit or infrastructure, or much to the states and localities for that matter. That's just not going to work, as you know, for the House and other parties involved. And he expressed his desire to push through more judges. So it seems pretty likely that we will have additional dollars coming through, to get us through this, at least in this initial phase. So again, we're taking a very conservative approach to this. We're working closely with the general manager. And Matt and I are involved. In fact, we have a call tomorrow with the general manager on various issues from the Virginia side. Stay tuned with all of this, but we are, doing the best we can. We are also, sensitive to the fact that we, are mindful that, what your budgets are going to probably look like for fiscal year 22. So looking at our 22 budget, we'll keep that at the top of mind. Maryland and the district are dealing with similar challenges, so it's going to be a challenging time for everyone all around. We also received a presentation on the audit. We received a clean audit, no comments for fiscal year 2020. There were two findings that were reported in fiscal year 19, but they were addressed by WMATA and satisfactorily closed. Also, I'll make a brief comment. We had our first meeting at for the consolidated audit. Andrew can talk about that, or Scott, or Katie might even be reporting on that later. But I hear from folks that did go well. Let's see, anything else here? We did have several public comments that came in on the proposed changes to the 21 budget. These changes include, or proposed changes include reductions in rail service and bus service, as well as additional actions taken by management to close the $212 million budget gap. So, and for right now, the Metrobus service would reinstate fares come January 1st. So that is it, Madam Chair. There's a lot there, but I think over the next couple of weeks, a lot of this will become more clear. And again, Matt and I are, having some discussions with the general manager tomorrow. And I am in contact with Paul, practically every other day, all of this and, the impact it's going to have, for some time to come. So if there are any questions, happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much. Really helpful. And I think that's especially helpful to have that insight about potential packages. So thank you for being our Hill prognosticator as well.
Well, yeah, no, we have someone who on our board who is one of the federal representatives who is, very well connected, worked on the Hill for a number of years, was at OMB, was in the Bush White House. And so he's well connected. And we have other sources that the general manager and I are talking to on the, the Democratic side, if you will. And it just, doesn't look that promising right now. So we'll see where it ends up come the beginning of the year. But for right now, there's going to be no relief and, coming anytime soon in terms of CARES Act 2.
Thank you. I think it makes sense to go to our vice chairman for our report on the WMATA committee, and then we'll take questions for both the WMATA committee and Mr. Smedberg. So, Councilman Aguirre and our chair of the WMATA committee, would you like to give us a report?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So last week, the WMATA committee met to review the draft 2020 annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA. In the report, the committee reviewed an update on COVID-19, chapter on strategies. Are you guys getting feedback, or is that just me? Sorry. So in the report, reviewed on the update COVID-19, the chapter on strategies to reduce costs and improve efficiencies, and the chapter on the uses of Virginia's dedicated capital fund. The full commission received the same copy of the draft that the committee discussed at our meeting, but tonight's presentation will also incorporate the committee's feedback. We heard general support for the recommended strategies, but the committee also had a good discussion about the report and comments on topics outside the scope of the report, such as equity at Metrobus. As the committee develops its work plan for 2021, I'd like the committee to continue those discussions with staff, and I will bond our board members as appropriate. So equity is still very much at the top of our minds as we move forward. Staff is also updating the data chapters of the report that will be provided to the commission along with the full report in December. And our next WMATA committee meeting is on December 16th to review the WMATA GM/CEO's proposed FY 2022 budget and discuss a draft letter of comments. And I think, Kate, I don't know, Ms. Matthijs, if you might have a couple of remarks.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context leading in as Andrew's going to walk through the annual report. And just sort of a reminder is that it's in the 2018 state legislation that established the dedicated capital funding for WMATA. The General Assembly also directed NVTC to prepare an annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA. And in addition to reporting on a number of different things that you're going to see Andrew talk about momentarily, uses of the dedicated fund, reporting the financial and performance data from WMATA, the legislation also provided NVTC to have an opportunity to recommend strategies to WMATA specifically focused on reducing the growth in annual costs and improving operational efficiency. And so this 2020 report is actually the third report that NVTC has put together and sent to the governor and the General Assembly. And so there's a number of things that are actually continuing to carry over from before. And Andrew's going to talk about the new ones, but I did want to quickly highlight that in the first two reports, we did focus on opportunities to increase ridership, specifically looking at making the system easier through things like fare products to really be attractive for families and university students and what have you, reducing costs through competitive contracting and advancing non-fare revenues such as joint development. And in its last two reports, we recommended a dozen or so strategies, again, related to rebuilding ridership and improving efficiency on bus and rail. and also included looking at enhancing the efficiency of the workforce. So again, many of these strategies pertain to attracting the new and retaining current riders, improving weekday rail service, developing and expanding fare passes, parking passes, developing the next generation of fare technology, and then making capital improvements that really improve reliability both on rail and bus. In addition, several of the strategies focus specifically on Metrobus. That we had a section specifically talking about reducing fare evasion, but also implementing pilot programs and other efforts that would increase the speed of Metrobus operations, and leveraging the expertise of local and regional partners to implement a number of the recommendations that were found in the bus transformation project. And so these are actually within the report, and Andrew's going to specifically talk about some of the newer ones, but we're happy to talk about any of them as we go into the comment period. So I'd like to hand off to Andrew now, who's again going to highlight what's in this year's report. And then we do at the end, we have an opportunity to pause for discussion and questions. So Andrew, go for it.
Thank you, Kate. Next slide. So as Kate mentioned, this annual report is found in the 2018 transit funding legislation, which created the dedicated capital funding, which you'll see a little bit of data on how it was used later in the presentation. The legislation directs us to include strategies to reduce the growth in costs and improve efficiency at WMATA, as well as other data reporting. And over the last few years, and especially this year, we've relied upon the NVTC WMATA committee to provide staff with guidance on key policy priorities as we update the reports. Next slide. Thank you. We did have a WMATA committee meeting last Thursday, and this is a summary of the feedback that we heard. In general, we had support for the continuing strategies from the previous two reports, as well as the new highlighted strategies, which you'll see shortly. We are going to make a few tweaks to the report, specifically to reiterate context about the budget impacts of COVID. There's a lot of tension between, I think, the current significant fiscal impacts at WMATA and some of the more longer term recommendations in the report. I think we'll continue to emphasize recommendations that improve bus service overall. We heard that loud and clear, as well as adding additional narrative on some of the reliability and performance data. And then we, as Chairman Aguirre alluded to, we will continue to use other vehicles to communicate concerns or support to Metro, both in the committee work plan and other letters that we send. I think we had a discussion on a number of topics that do fall outside of the scope of the strategies chapter, but are nonetheless important, and there are opportunities to address them through other means. Next slide. A big update that the committee directed us to include earlier in the year was the COVID-19 context. So in your meeting materials, you see several chapters. There's a significantly more lengthy introduction this year than in previous years, detailing the impact of COVID on WMATA. I think Chairman Smedberg mentioned this extensively, so I'll just hit the highlights that, we've made sure the report includes that COVID has caused significant ridership and fare revenue impacts on WMATA. The CARES Act funding is anticipated to be exhausted by January 2021, and that without any additional federal aid, it's obviously really huge potential impacts here on WMATA in terms of service and personnel. And then as far as NVTC strategies go, these are obviously helpful for recovery, rebuilding ridership, becoming more efficient, but they're not a silver bullet for the immediate fiscal impacts that are upon us, especially without federal aid. Next slide. The next two slides cover the strategies to reduce the growth in costs and improve the efficiency of WMATA. And these are important because it's an ability for NVTC to state its policy priorities in this arena. What we did is we took the last 2 years of recommendations and restructured them into these overarching strategies on the left. And as Kate mentioned, most of these are aimed at rebuilding ridership. You can see many of them were, all of them were carried over here, as well as improving efficiency, where many of these are focused on bus service and implementing some of the recommendations from the bus transformation study, which really is about leveraging local and regional state partners with WMATA, because WMATA does not control the streets. Several new or tweaked recommendations that I want to highlight include communicating and encouraging a safe return to transit. This is something we heard loud and clear from the commission over the last a few months, and WMATA has started a marketing campaign on this, but we made sure to include this recommendation here in the report, as well as adapting rail service to match demand during the pandemic and subsequent recovery period is a carryover, but with added weight and context for this year's report. Next slide. And then the last of the three overarching categories are to increase non-fare revenue and control cost escalation and enhance efficiency of the workforce. And most of these non-fare revenue strategies, in fact, all of them are carryovers, but they're all about increasing advertising, parking, joint development, real estate, revenue, efficiencies through sustainability. And these are all long-term. This is something that the committee discussed last week. We'll add a little context here because as many of you know, especially joint development is a very long-term thing, but it does yield dividends and hence is why it's included in the report. For the controlling cost escalation, we have a number of strategies that are and recommendations that are included in the materials. They haven't changed from previous years, but one that I want to highlight for this evening is using the 3% cap as a tool during labor negotiations in the annual budget development is something that I think is important, as the commission also saw the report on the 3% cap. Next slide. And then, as was mentioned by Kate, this report includes uses of the dedicated capital funding. And so the dedicated capital funding is what was created by the 2018 transit funding legislation. It's the $500 million a year from DC, Maryland, and Virginia that is dedicated and mostly bondable for WMATA to embark on large long-term projects. Virginia's share of this is $154 million, with the remainder coming from DC and Maryland. And the table on the right shows the main CIP categories and the expenditures from fiscal year 2020 from the Virginia Fund. Next slide, please. I do want to scale up a little bit to the entire fiscal year 2020 capital program. Dedicated funding was obviously a key component as it came online in all three jurisdictions fully for fiscal year 2020, but there's also a number of other state, local, and federal funds that contribute to the growing capital program at WMATA. There are two key highlights that I do want to mention, which are the conditional acceptance of the entirety of the 7000 series, which has really had huge dividends for rail reliability, as well as phase 2 of the platform improvement project, which was started in fiscal 20 and near completion in 21 with the rehabilitation of 4 stations west of Boston. Next slide. We did discuss with the committee the performance data that we had available last week. These are some highlights that I'll go over. So for on-time performance and equipment reliability for rail, that increased and really skyrocketed in the last 4 years. And this is mainly due to the capital investments that WMATA has made on rail cars, but as well as other factors. It is really an excellent story for the system. On-time performance, however, for Metrobus was and is lower than rail. And this is something that the committee discussed extensively last week. And the primary factor there is traffic congestion, which, as I mentioned previously, WMATA does not control. And then Metrobus equipment reliability did decline in the previous 2 years, but has rebounded, and this is mainly due to specific bus fleet issues, and again, capital investments and other improvements, especially replacing and rehabilitating buses, has yielded success. Next slide. So as far as next steps on the annual report, we'll be updating the remaining chapters that you'll see in December, which are the safety and financial performance chapters. We're waiting on National Transit Database data to become available in order to do that, so cross your fingers for this month. And we'll obviously be incorporating comments that we heard both last week and this week from commissioners, as well as just getting the report formatted and ready for December 3rd commission meeting, where it will be an action item, and then it is due on December 15th. And so with that, I will move on to discussion and hand it back to Chairman Aguirre.
Thank you for that, Andrew. I think that was pretty comprehensive, and we're looking for some feedback from the rest of the commission, essentially.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And I think this is also a good opportunity for questions for Mr. Smedberg as well. So feedback on that really helpful presentation from Mr. Diviter, and thank you for to you and to Ms. Mattice for teeing up that this is not a report necessarily on the topics that the Commission thinks are most important, but rather a report that follows the outline and format spelled out to us by the General Assembly. So if there is something included that you think is not a priority, it's likely for that reason. And of course, it is our opportunity to add anything else we might wish to. So if there's something missing, that could be helpful feedback as well. So let me open the floor. I think we've generally been able to do this without the hands raised function. So if folks would like to unmute themselves to chime in, and if you're not speaking, to mute yourself.
Hi, this is John Bell. Got a quick question.
Hello there.
Hi. So thank you for the great briefings. Good report. Here's a question I've got. I mean, I agree with Paul with what you're saying about federal assistance. The message has been unfortunately consistent on this, but I think this is a nationwide problem, not just a problem, with WMATA. And frankly, it's a crisis across our nation with our public transportation, which is desperately needed. Have we given any thought to teaming with other localities to kind of create a united front to our federal delegations on this? Because I think, frankly, we could talk about our public transportation, mass transportation as a key point of our economic rebound strategy and also even national security. But I think if we team together with other localities, because all my research says everyone's struggling. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, Senator Bell, you're correct. I mean, WMATA is not the only system or nation nationally that is suffering. They all are, some worse than others. But we are very fortunate in this region to have a very supportive federal delegation. Not only our Virginia federal delegation, but the state of Maryland and the district folks as well. So, and they do work together collaboratively on this effort. And we have made that case to them, and I know the top 7-8 authorities like or transit agencies like WMATA nationally are working together collaboratively on this. The general manager, Paul Wiedefeld, is part of a group at APTA, and he's used frequently to help promote the importance of transit. And I know from the Commonwealth's perspective, once we do come out of this, we want people to once again use transit and not get back in their cars after all this investment and everything that's happening. So there's a lot of effort going on right now to promote the importance of transit. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Meyer. I see a hand up there.
Following up on that, Mr. Smedberg is correct. There's really only maybe less than 10 major transportation authorities that similar to Metro in the United States, and unfortunately, they don't have a lot of touch points with a lot of different congressional districts. Having said that, there are some other places, though. For example, there are places in the United States where rail cars are manufactured or components are manufactured in Alabama or Nebraska. And so there are jobs related to our systems in congressional districts that might not at first glance seem like they have an interest. So I do think that the network of interested congressional representatives could be more significant than we may at first glance realize.
No, you're absolutely right. And there are, it isn't limited to just the 7 or 8 groups that Mr. Wiedefeld is working with, and APTA and others. And we have sent various letters from the board to, the congressional leaders. But you're right, David. There are other associations and other organizations promoting transit for sure. Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I could just respond a little bit to that, because in fact, just late this afternoon, I participated in a call with several hundred transit agencies around the country as a part of the American Public Transportation Association, specifically working together and rallying on how to pivot with the new leadership dynamics, both potentially at the White House as well as sitting on Congress. So as many of the others have said, the role of manufacturers and other business organizations, including a lot of major contractors and consulting firms that are involved in the transportation industry, as well as the transit industry, are working very hard together. Obviously, the backbone are the large systems like WMATA, but there is actually an incredible network. The American Public Transportation Association, NVTC, is a member, as well as VRE and WMATA. We're all a part of that. And so, as I said, just as recently as this afternoon, as I was on a couple-hour call specifically talking about strategies moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Matthijs. And were you going to add anything, Mr. Smedberg? Okay, great. Thank you.
No, that's it.
Other questions? Oh, great. Thanks. I see Ms. Garvey with a hand up.
Thank you. I'm not sure. So I guess I'm thinking WMATA can't run at a deficit, I guess. We can't run at a deficit. And if the federal government doesn't put any money in, what kind of options are out there? I'm just kind of curious. I have a sense, pretty dire, but I assume we'll pull it out, but I'd love just a general sense of what we're looking at, or what Mitch McConnell might be looking at if he doesn't provide support.
Yeah, so Ms. Garvey, so just in fiscal year 21, again, we're looking at about $210, $212 million worth of cuts. 42 of that approximately is management actions that the general manager could take administratively. A large bulk of it would be layoffs of approximately 1,700 people that is potentially on the table. Service adjustments, for rail and bus. So those are the main, three things that are going to get you to that, 210, 212 million.
Thank you. And I'm assuming the cuts, for service would have to be major to get to that point.
I wouldn't actually. Well, I mean, they are not what we're used to, but they were around service levels where we were in, say, August.
Okay.
So you'll still have rail service, but it's not going to be every 8 minutes. It may be every 12 minutes or 13 minutes. That kind of thing. So,
okay, that's very helpful, Paul. Thank you. Just gives me a context to put it in. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mr. Smedberg, this is kind of a worst case scenario, but if they were to have a layoff of that magnitude, I would think that in addition to the long-term cost to the system, in terms of losing the expertise, the trained employees who are certified in certain activities, some may retire, some may move away, some may simply lose their edge in terms of performance if they were to be brought back later. Mm-hmm. And it could have some safety implications as well. And I'm sure that WMATA has considered all of those, both short-term and long-term.
Absolutely. And it is a very challenging thing. There's the possibility that, some people may retire, or there's some of that number. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but there are, some percentage of unfilled positions, but a large bulk of it would be people. And as you say, David, it's very hard to, there's a lot of training in a lot of the WMATA positions, and it's pretty challenging. It would definitely, cause a problem. So, but Mr. Wiedefeld and his team are definitely thinking all this through, and they've been working closely with the union and other organizations to make sure it would have as minimal impact as possible. And it's a concern. But I think too, thinking longer term and bigger picture, as we come out of this coronavirus situation, what is work going to look like for us, in terms of people coming into the office, telework, how's that going to impact things? What is our transit system going to look like in the future? That's a discussion that we're going to start to have. What is WMATA going to look like in the future? But for right now, we've got to deal with the immediate, situation, and it's a challenge.
Mr. Snyder.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for these reports, I think. Clearly we support any efforts to get federal assistance. Let's assume that we don't. I think the City of Falls Church has supported your proposed changes to adjust to the circumstances for FY21 if needed. When will you start a dialogue with us on FY22? The contingency plans there. And I think you can probably safely assume that at least from my jurisdiction, there won't be more money for Metro and maybe less. So assuming the absence of significant federal assistance, the need to move people, but to do it as efficiently as possible. When are you going to start the contingency planning for FY 2022, and when will you begin a conversation with this commission on that?
Yeah. So, Mr. Snyder, so the timeline we have now is on the 19th of November. The board will consider the fiscal year 21 adjustments. Also at that same meeting, the general manager will present his, sort of preliminary forecast and some of the projections for 22. So at that time, we would be able to, start engaging and, have, a more thoughtful discussion. It would give us time, obviously work with Chair Crystal and others, but, there's a lot to consider. And I know, obviously, Mr. Wiedefeld and his team have started to thinking about it and are, drafting budgets like your CAOs are, city managers are. But, it's going to be, a little bit yet before we see, a clearer outline of what they're thinking about exactly for 22. But again, like I highlighted, initially there was quite a range. I think initial projections were that we were, and what we were hearing from the federal government, from the Pentagon, and from the area businesses that people initially were planning on coming back, sometime at the beginning of the year. That's obviously changed. So the projections, I gave quite a range there. I think 165 to 345, but the reality is it's the potential adjustments are going to have to be on that upper end for sure, given what we know right now.
Okay, so at our next commission meeting, we'll hear the initial discussion that you're having on the 19th. And then maybe we can begin some sort of a process to work with you to support you and our other representatives moving forward, making certain assumptions about the local government budgets as well as the Metro budget. Is that right?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, Matt and I obviously are very sensitive to the fact of the jurisdictional subsidy and contribution, and I'm dealing with the state of Maryland and the district, trying to understand where they're coming from and what they're going to be dealing with. They have some just as serious, if not more serious, challenges than we do in some ways. So yeah, it's all around. It's going to be quite a year financial to address all these needs and the challenges.
And I'll chime in to say, Mr. Schmeberger, that I really appreciate you and Mr. Letourneau's assumption throughout. I mean, I know this has been a discussion in the fiscal 21 budget adjustments. And I know you've mentioned consistently, and you and Mr. Letourneau have both been really consistent in being clear that that gap has to be solved through the expenditure side, and that there is not funds available on the revenue side, which is to say the jurisdictional subsidies. So I agree with Mr. Snyder that that's a really important consideration. I think it's one you've represented well to date.
Yeah, and Chair Crystal, if I could just briefly, we highlighted the $1.9 billion in capital projects. The vast majority of that is focused on safety and state of good repair. Again, we are committed to that. And also too, a lot of that dollar amount, or several of those projects have certain grants and federal dollars and other sources tied to it. And so we are, obviously committed to making sure that those projects continue to move forward.
Other questions for Mr. Smedberg, or I'd be remiss if I didn't know feedback for our WMATA committee and Mr. Doivetter on the draft annual report. All right. Hearing none, we do appreciate the work of the WMATA committee and that excellent draft. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to reflect on any further questions or feedback between now and December when it comes to us as an action item. Okay. So I believe that moves us next into our commuter choice program, which is just as a reminder, we're going to have a block vote unless anybody objects on the 2 commuter choice actions regarding both the policy changes governing the overall commuter choice program, 66 and 395, and then authorizing some technical evaluation changes and a call for projects on the 95, 395. So to introduce this for us as chair of our program advisory committee, which has been home to evaluating these changes and proposals, Mr. Snyder, let me turn it to you as chair of the PAC.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we have, as was mentioned, we have 2 items, number 2424 and number 2425. The first relates generally to the commuter choice program, and the second item is a call for projects for I-95. I'll turn it over to Kate to sort of run over, go over, as opposed to run over, go over the commuter choice program. A little too much transportation mixed in there. So we'll go over the commuter choice program and then the call for projects. Kate, you want to summarize the key changes there?
Happy to do so, Mr. Snyder. So, Madam Chair, as Mr. Snyder mentioned, we have 2 commuter choice actions related for consideration. And then I also will provide a very brief update on the I-66 Round 4 program. And so as we briefed the Commission last month, we would like to implement 4 policy changes to the commuter choice program. And this would be implemented for both the I-66 as well as the 395 program. And those 4 items start with establishing an application and funding framework for larger capital projects, which would allow for funding across multiple program years. So instead of a large project taking up a single year of funding, we could actually spread it out over multiple years to allow for other projects to potentially be added to the mix. But it would also increase project accountability and oversight by our part. The second policy change is setting a minimum funding award amount to $200,000 so that we can sort of optimize the administrative burden for each application. The third one is establishing requirements for our transportation demand management projects so we can allow for better performance measurement of those types of projects. And just as a reminder, the memorandum of agreement that we have with the Commonwealth does require extensive reporting and accountability really for the performance of all of the projects. And this is an area where we saw we could definitely do some improvements in reporting the performance, sort of how well those dollars invested were. And then finally, the last thing that we'd like to consider is including a requirement for documentation from area partners. When we have a project that either crosses jurisdiction or would rely on another entity to be successfully completed, we're asking for an actual letter of support by that entity. So for example, if we're doing a busway project, having a letter from VDOT. If we're doing something related to Metro, having a letter from WMATA. And so those are the policy items that are we're seeking approval under Resolution 2424. And then if I could quickly also, I know you've had a lot of briefings also on the 395-95 program. We are actually at a point at which we can move forward on this next call for projects. We actually do have very good news from our partners at the Commonwealth. We do anticipate a full funding of this program through their agreement with Transurban. If you recall, this is approximately $15 million a year program to fund projects along this long corridor. And so we're seeking approval from the Commission to adopt the technical evaluation process that we actually had used for 66, but it's basically moving that over and using it for 395, as we've done in the past, and then opening the call for projects for our localities and eligible transit agencies to apply. So those are the two action items. And just before we go to take those actions, because we often miss these little updates, I did want to make sure I provided, just remind you that we did submit to the Commonwealth Transportation Board at their last workshop, the I-66 projects that this body did approve last month. Overall, the Commonwealth Transportation Board was supportive of our conservative approach and looking at that smaller program for the time being. And they will likely take action on that first part of round 4 for 66 at their December meeting. And so without that, I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can also move on to taking the motion and then have discussion at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Mattice. Mr. Snyder, any concluding thoughts for us?
Sure. These are efforts to reform and streamline both of these program areas. I think with regard to I-66, as the status report indicated, we have a reduced funding amount, and the hope is that some additional funding will come forward, perhaps even early in 21. And the hope is that we can move forward and then continue on the list of evaluated projects when money becomes available. We're currently planning for that to be mid-year, but it's my hope that if the funding circumstances become more definite, that we can move down through that list of projects more rapidly. So that would be my hope. And I would move approval of Resolution 2424 and Resolution 2425. And I entertain any questions. I'll probably refer to Kate.
Thanks so much. Do we have a second on the motion?
I second it.
Okay, I think that was Mayor Meyer. Thank you so much. And Mr. Schneider, thank you too for the work of your committee and the analysis. This has been a rapidly shifting year, and we really appreciate your dedicated attention to it. I have just one question to begin for Ms. Mattice. Regarding the technical changes that require a letter of support from partner or implicated agencies or jurisdictions, I know, for example, from experience on the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, that a threshold requirement sometimes for funding is a project coordination agreement or sort of a signed memo between the two parties that the project is advancing. And so I really wanted to make sure I understood, technically what we're asking for with this change. It's simply a letter of endorsement or support, or is it something that's risen to the level of a coordination agreement?
At this point in time, we actually are just looking for a letter of support. That we actually we provided a sample documentation. We actually had a model for something that Fairfax County had looked to WMATA when making changes for the McLean station. So again, it doesn't need to be a board action by that other entity. A senior official is fine. But part of it is we know the success of that project, especially if it is in partnership, is often about that partnership. And so knowing from the get-go that everybody is on board will make for a more successful project.
Thanks, Ms. Mattice. I find that helpful. Other questions or comments about these changes on updates to the Commuter Choice Program or about the call for projects for round 2 on 395 and 95? Okay. Everyone's quiet. Does that mean there was a vote count dump from Pennsylvania that I missed? Is that all right? Thank you so much, and thanks for the good work. Seeing no further questions or discussion, we've got a motion on the table. I'm going to go ahead and ask our Commission Secretary to call the roll for the vote.
Madam Chair, was there a second? Wanted to make sure there was a second.
From Mr. Meyer.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay.
Great. All right, Ms. Gilchrist, over to you.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Corn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw. The motion passes.
Thanks very much, Ms. Gilchrist. Okay, moving then into a legislative update. I'm going to invite Mr. Meyer, who's the chair of our Legislative and Policy Committee, to give a report with, I think, a capable assist from Zach Smith to give us an update as well. So, Mr. Meyer, over to you.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to express my appreciation to Mr. Snyder for his chairing of the PAC, and we can also call him the leader of the PAC. And I think I just showed my age. But there, if anybody's into motorcycles, there's a transportation motif in there somewhere, and that poor attempt at a pun. Last month, on October 15, the Legislative and Policy Committee met, and we reviewed and discussed our priorities for the upcoming 2021 GA, and also our agenda for the General Assembly coming up in January. Now, as most of you know from your other assignments, the General Assembly last year, in their regular session, in their Transportation Omnibus Bill, included a number of structural changes on how transportation in the Commonwealth is funded. And these changes were positive in terms of benefiting local transit operations, including WMATA and VRE. And so this year, the legislative and policy agenda is really going to be focused on simply, not simply because it's going to be a challenge, but to protect those programs and revenue streams in Richmond at the state level. Now, at the federal level, as Mr. Smedberg gave a very thorough presentation of the status of WMATA's funding, more generally across the country, I think his comments can be applied to transportation systems writ large, and we're going to be continuing to advocate for transit funding at the federal level. So where we are now is that I'm hoping that this discussion, after Zach Smith gives us a more detailed overview of our agenda, that we will have a discussion as we move forward for a final adoption of the agenda at our December meeting. So with that, I'm going to recognize Zach Smith for a more detailed overview or review of our draft agenda items.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Just before I begin, just a couple things to note. The items included in the commission materials have a bit more detail to explain why certain priorities and legislative asks were included in this year's policy agenda. So this presentation is just a brief overview of our priorities for the state and federal legislators. But as context, most of these are broad priorities and in most cases not necessarily specific legislative asks. But as bills drop, the commission can use the legislative and policy agenda to tailor our position to those specific issues. Also, our final legislative and policy agenda will also include talking points and messaging on the benefits of transit, especially given the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, our primary priority for the next General Assembly session is to protect existing funding streams and transit programs. We supported many of the provisions and structural changes to transportation that were included in the Transportation Omnibus Bill that passed the General Assembly this past spring, and we want to see those continue. Next, we have connecting riders to opportunity, which is in support of ways to reduce barriers to transit and acknowledge the connection that transportation and transit in particular have to promoting equity among riders. And just moving along, last December, the governor announced a significant initiative to improve rail in Virginia. And after that, we saw the creation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, which would support operators like VRE. So we've made it a point to continue our support for rail improvements in Virginia. And we also include some similar language in our federal priorities. We have restoring long-term funding for the authority. And this just speaks to our support for restoring funding to NVTA that was reallocated in 2018 for the WMATA Dedicated Capital Fund. The General Assembly did partially restore funding to NVTA in this past session, but not the full funding that went to the WMATA Capital Fund. Also, we want to highlight the good work that the Commission does to support transit in the region. So with that and our theme of protecting existing transit programs, we have protecting and preserving NVTC stewardship of NVTC programs as well. And finally, on the state agenda, we have legislative language was included in the Commonwealth budget that will provide flexibility for NVTC, NVTA, CTB, and VRE to hold a joint meeting remotely during declared states of emergency. We're also watching for any proposals that will provide greater flexibility to public bodies to meet remotely outside of states of emergency, and we're seeking to make those permanent. Next slide. So on the federal side, we include support to continue dedicated federal funding for WMATA's state of good repair improvements. We're also supporting any additional federal funding for COVID-19 relief for transit agencies. As Congress considers a new surface transportation bill, we want transit to be a priority. And also funding for new or improved transit infrastructure would require a look at the Highway Trust Fund and how dollars are allocated from that. Long Bridge is a project with national implications, and we believe that should include federal support. And finally, we want to continue our support for federal transit commuter benefits as well. And so with that, I'll take any questions on the legislative and policy agenda.
Mr. Smith, may I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Please, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smith, on the issue of remote meetings, you mentioned, I guess it was in the second sentence of the bullet point, that you're looking for authority to broaden the flexibility, post-pandemic. Can you flesh that out for me a little bit more? Are there any would there be any defining circumstances, or is the proposal that you're looking for to just allow remote meeting any time and every time?
Well, for right now, I know there are other groups that are primarily taking the lead on this. We don't have a specific legislative ask, although we just want to explore some different options and alternatives that will allow us to meet virtually, given that we don't necessarily know how long this pandemic will last. And also, once the pandemic is lifted, it is a little bit easier for our commissioners to sometimes meet virtually than in person. Kate, I don't know if you have anything to add, or Amy.
I'm happy to add a little bit more again, and I know we have a couple of commissioners who are very near and dear to their heart. So part of the reason including this is we did have members of a couple of our committees, or a couple of our commissioners had mentioned interest in looking at greater flexibility, than more, instead of currently, I guess it's 2 meetings per year being allowed to participate electronically, if there would potentially be some flexibility to add more than that. And so one of the things, of course, we've recognized is that we've actually had almost 100% participation by commissioners during being able to do virtual. And of course, we're in person, we're in Arlington, and we have commissioners coming from as far away as Leesburg historically. So we're sensitive staff-wise to what this looks like, but I do know that there are a couple other commissioners, and please chime in if you'd like to share your insights and your desire, why you want us to make sure we put this on our legislative agenda.
I wonder if I could ask Ms. Bennett Parker to chime in, because I know she's been really leading on this in the region.
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to that. So I think I serve on VRE as well as this regional board, as well as another regional board. And I think there are a number of places in the current law. So speaking specifically to the ability of individual members to participate electronically when there is a physical quorum in the room when meetings are happening in person. The law limits that right now to, as Ms. Matthijs said, 2 times per calendar year, regardless of how many times the public body may meet. Some bodies meet a lot more frequently, recognizing that a lot of regional bodies like ourselves, we have subcommittee meetings as well. And we generally, sorry, that's sort of jumping ahead to the next issue, but I think there are a number of things in the law that exist where if you were to use a personal matter to participate electronically, the meeting minutes still need to reflect, sort of where you're participating and why. And I think sort of the number of times a member should be, my personal view is that the number of times a member of a public body should be able to participate electronically should be left sort of to the determination of the public body to determine what makes sense for its circumstances and conditions and communities. I mean, I can speak to the VRE side of things as well, in that we have we have a very large geographic region, and I know it can take folks significant travel to get to meetings. And I know our subcommittee meetings also tend to be scheduled for right after the meeting, much as with NVTC, but our VRE meetings are at 9 a.m. on Friday mornings. And sometimes our subcommittee meetings actually get cut short or rescheduled if our main meeting runs long, just because we have to be there. Those meetings have to happen in person, and people do need to get on their way to other things. So I could talk about this for a very long time. I will stop there. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, let me just ask why I asked the question. There's a lot of conversation going in, frankly, all walks of life as to what things that we've, changes we've made to our lives as a result of the pandemic are going to survive the end of the pandemic. Everything from telecommuting to, how much office space are people going to need, restaurants and such. And I asked the question simply because I've been wondering whether, sort of the era of, the Zoom call is going to stick with us in many ways. And I can see this being a good opportunity. I had originally read the update, the item on the agenda as suggesting that the idea was to find ways or to contemplate a way which the commission could always meet remotely. I understand there's a difference between that and making it more flexibility for some members on some occasions to meet remotely. And I don't know where the right answer is in there, but it's just an interesting question to me. And I think it's going to be one of those things. A lot of organizations are going to be meeting a lot more frequently this way, because there are clear downsides to it, but there are a lot of upsides to it too.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please. Is that Mr. Krizik?
It is. So I kind of see two issues, I guess. One is when you would have a meeting, when you would be remote and affect the quorum. And so we may want to push for legislation that allows for a certain number or percentage of meetings to be allowed to have remote members on or remotely on or virtually on that will affect the quorum. And then the other issue, it almost seems to me it's another bill almost, perhaps, and that is just allowing that whatever the committee is to make the determination on whether their members that don't affect the quorum could join virtually. Do you understand what I'm saying? And does that make some sense?
So I can begin by saying I think that makes sense to me, and I think there may be interest in both. But I know some of what Ms. Bennett Parker was sharing was really about that flexibility for the second piece to enable these bodies to make that right determination for them. So I certainly don't want to speak for you, Elizabeth. So Ms. Bennett Parker, if you had anything else to add, but I think emphasizing those distinct issues is helpful.
Yeah. Because the second issue and what I think is an easier lift.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Madam Chair?
Please, Senator Evans.
I think that what's likely to happen if someone was to put in a bill or so forth would be that this would get referred to what's called the FOIA Commission, which opines on this sort of thing and makes getting a bill through much easier. Because invariably you put in a bill like this, you bring it to committee and someone says, has this gone to the FOIA Commission yet? So I think this is worth floating, and whether it's through a bill that it gets referred there or just through a study resolution that asks the FOIA Commission to look at that. But I do think they're worth raising, both issues of participation outside of the quorum and of having the actual meeting to review the requirements and what seems like an artificially low limitation of 2 meetings, whether it should be 2 meetings or 50% of 2 or 50%, whichever is greater, or however one words it.
And I believe this, thank you for that insight. I think this may be with the FOIA Commission now. Ms. Bennett Parker, I know you've been following that closely. Or I think I see Ms. Seibert with a video screen on as well. So maybe if you'd like to give us any insights onto where this is, if you or Ms. Bennett Parker who have been following this closely.
I'm happy to say something. I have to actually talk to the staff at the FOIA Council about this issue, and I think I've also talked to VACO and VML and some other folks about sort of where we would be about looking at sort of this. I think it's almost like this sort of a threefold issue. We have Ms. Bennett Parker's bill that's currently in front of the electronic subcommittee of the FOIA Council, which actually was recommended to have some changes and be reported to the full FOIA Council, and that was a bill from Delegate Levine last year. So there's that issue, which is a sort of the ability to participate remotely if folks have medical conditions in their family. And then the other two issues are, Delegate Sullivan, which helped us greatly with the whole issue of the pandemic and how to respond during a pandemic, which we will need to address during 2021 and actually put that in the code. So I think that's going to definitely be something that needs to be addressed. But then along the lines of what Senator Evans said, when I talked to the staff at FOIA Council, they don't even think they need a study resolution. They think they can just look at and study the issue of electronic participation for meetings, both participation and holding meetings electronically in the 2021 interim to be able to look at that issue and examine all these things that you've just talked about. Like, should it be 50%? Should it be a percentage? Should it be the body itself that gets to decide? So I think there's a lot of, when you look at the FOIA law, public body covers a lot of different bodies, not just our regional bodies, and not even just our local governing bodies. It's also college, university boards of visitors. There's a lot of people that need to be at the table for that conversation. And it's probably something that really needs to be done, I think, in the interim of 2021. So I think that's something that we can certainly do. So I think having it on there is important, but I think that's something that would probably be an interim 2021 study to come back for 2022, if that makes sense. So.
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Reed. I have a question about a different topic.
Would you mind? I think Senator Eben had one follow-up on that.
Okay, sure.
One, and then we'll go to you next. Thank you.
I had the same topic, though. I did want to say something.
So let me let Senator Eben follow up, and then Ms. Gorey will go to you next.
But yeah, just before we move on, I just wanted to say that as specific a scenario or an ask as we wanted to start from going to the FOIA Commission makes it more likely that we'll get to the heart of the matter of what's wanted. So, whether Ms. Bennett Parker does it, we haven't taken any official action asking, I don't think, for a particular fix, but she may want to talk to the head of the FOIA Commission to find out when that meeting would be, or perhaps Amy could fill her in on that.
I think she may know, because I believe she's been speaking and advocating.
Okay, but we may want to look at it in a larger sense. So just I don't know if it's to have a separate discussion on that.
Got it. Thank you so much, Senator Eben. I think that's a really helpful insight. And Ms. Gerby.
Yes, excuse me for interrupting, but I did want to talk on this subject, and I want to thank Ms. Bennett Parker for bringing this up. I think it's really important. I am totally supportive. Maximum flexibility, the body should decide. And I know there are political realities. If there's a reason for FOIA that you need to require, us to meet in person, that makes it, more transparent, that's fine. But all of these percentages and all this, I see no legal reason to have them, because, we're doing a great job, I think, now. And in question of why, we're all discovering a lot of things that help a lot. Local government and government, these are difficult positions to manage while you're doing everything and driving all over Northern Virginia. I think we've all found it's helpful to do this. I think people are able to participate better. So it seems to me, unless the FOIA Commission has come up with some reason of transparency or something terrible happening if we give us flexibility, I see no reason not to give maximum flexibility and treat us like adults that we know how to handle our own work the best. Now, I know that may be a step too far. So I would be supportive of the maximum you can get for flexibility, because I think we know how to do the work. We want to do the work. And this is helping us do the work. And anything with all of these sort of odd, trying to decide who gets to do what and how and what percentage and what's a case and what isn't. It's just crazy to do that for the entire state, and uses up a lot of time and energy that we really need to be spending on other things. So thank you again to Ms. Bennett Parker.
Madam Chair, Senator Bell, if I could do one before we go to
of course.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I think that COVID and the challenges we're facing today Thank God for technology and the ability to use technology to continue to do the people's business. And I think we're going to need to do that going forward. As we explore this, though, I think part of it needs to continue to be how do we make sure we have public involvement and how do we make sure there's adequate notice. So I would just include that. And as we go forward, if we do make this request or if we try to codify this in any way or go to the FOIA Council, because I think those are important things. I know it's something in the General Assembly we've struggled with, and we've tried our best to make sure we have public involvement, public feedback, particularly in real time, because there's a big difference between having a live dialogue and a taped or written statement. So I think those are very important parts of it, because as we go forward, well, I think we have to do this right now. And I think there's many advantages continue to have this ability to be flexible, that we also need to make sure we don't take the public out of the mix in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Okay, other questions or comments on this topic? Okay, before we go to Delegate Reid, I'll just signal my own support for it, particularly allowing the flexibility for bodies to determine what the right level of participation is for individual members. I think we've all had experiences with this in our home jurisdictions and certainly on regional bodies. And I think is often the principle in many issues regarding legislation. The bodies that are closest to the people sometimes know whether this virtual participation can allow for more public inclusion. So I hope we can proceed with some flexibilities in the coming months and perhaps use what we've learned from the pandemic as a way to not only invite the public in different ways, but perhaps to make public service more feasible for a wider swath of the diverse population that comprises Northern Virginia. So, okay, Delegate Reid, on to you. You've been very patient, and thank you much.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I will say this: when we were doing the criminal justice reform hearings, as we were leading up to the special session, and I know that the speaker probably has the number on the top of her head, but by doing them virtually, we had more participation statewide and from across the entire state than for any other type of hearing that we had ever done before. So again, I think there is and I do have another question, but there is a way to do this where you can actually get more citizen participation than you can if you're requiring in-person meetings. So the question I have is that I wanted to ask about the restoring the funding for NVTA, because I know from the very time that that the money was reallocated away from NVTA, the entirety of the Northern Virginia delegation has been working to get that money restored. What I wanted to know, and we've taken steps in each session since then, is do we actually have a quantifiable number as far as how much there is still left for there to be restored?
Well, I think Mr. McKay and Ms. Randall's going to kill us for not having that at the top of our heads as the chair of NVTA, who emphasizes the importance of this each meeting. I don't know if anybody on our legislative team has an answer, but if not, I know we can get that back to you as soon as possible from the team at the authority.
NVTA's,
if you could, because
the agenda.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say in their legislative and policy agenda, they're asking for an additional $32 million, and that would restore funding.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Smith.
David, this is Madam Chair. This is Rip. I thought the number was a little lower, but that's in the right ballpark.
I wasn't sure, and I know that there have been some other sources of funding that have not kind of delivered as much revenue as expected because, again, of the pandemic, and so there's a lot of variables, but it's good to know kind of what the number is that we're looking at.
Yeah, Katie, it's Jeff McKay. That number is the one that has been shared with NVTA for exactly the reason that Senator Reid just mentioned. It is a little bit higher than probably numbers in the past, but it's meant to also incorporate the lack of increased funding that was supposed to be coming through at this point.
So again, just
and the chair, the executive director of the authority has confirmed it is $32 million.
Okay, so and again, thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just reiterate that this is something that is on the forefront of everyone's mind from the Northern Virginia delegation, that we have been working diligently to try to be able to address this since the funds were removed from NVTA several years ago.
Thank you. I really appreciate, I think the whole region really appreciates your keeping that on the priority list.
And I appreciate the question, and yes, we did have a discussion about that, and it's in that ballpark of 32 million. But we also were saying that at a minimum, and I know this sounds minimalist, that we want to do no harm. We want the GA to do no harm, and if there's an opportunity to go forward with restoring some or all of that, we certainly want to see that happen. But we certainly don't want it to go in the other direction and have a repeat of what happened in 18 and invoking the pandemic as the justification. Madam Chair, I have I wanted to speak to two of these bullet items, if I may.
Please do.
I want the commissioners to continue to give us feedback on this. There were two items on here. One is I just want to verbalize for the record about preserving the NVTC's stewardship of NTC programs. We have a number of relatively new members of the GA, and particularly those who might not be from our region, who might ask, well, why do we have an NVTA? Why do we have an NVTC? We have this alphabet soup in Northern Virginia, all related to transit, and why don't we streamline this and save money? And I just want to make sure that our representatives from Northern Virginia are fortified to tell the story of what NVTC does and the successes that we've had, and be able to make that case if it comes up. We certainly don't want to entertain that discussion, but if it were to surface, we want people to be fortified to be able to talk to that point. The other item that's on the list here is connecting riders to opportunity through transit. And I feel a particular passion toward this particular subject. And I just want to share with you a discussion that we had on our October 15th committee meeting. And this is anecdotal, but I think it helps people understand it in very specific ways. We're a very small city, the city of Fairfax, but we do have our own bus system in the city. And when the pandemic hit and the shutdown occurred, especially in late March, April, and May, and June, our ridership plummeted substantially. And at the same time, we were concerned about our exposure of our bus drivers to the virus. So we put plexiglass around the driver's seat, and we had all the riders enter and exit the bus from the back. And we suspended all fares. And at that time, the ridership leveled out to about 550 people a day. And it was steady every day, day after day, week after week for several months. And the people who were riding those buses were taking the bus to work, to jobs that they absolutely were critical for them to have. And the reason they were taking a bus is because they didn't have any other transit option. And they were disproportionately lower income individuals and persons of color. And so what that told us in the city was that there is a baseline of ridership, particularly on bus, that is very much dependent on those systems to provide them access to their jobs. And they were very appreciative. I mean, a few dollars a day of free transportation, I'm sure they appreciated it. We did it for all the wrong reasons. Well, we did it for the right reason, to protect our drivers, but we also did it. Later on, we realized that it was a social equity issue. And I'm hoping to make our bus system fare-free permanently. It's going to cost us a little more than a penny on the tax rate. It's going to be a heavy lift when we're in a situation like we are today. But as we look at transit systems across the Commonwealth, I don't want us to forget. I want us to keep in the forefront of our minds that these systems exist for everyone, but especially for those who may not have other transit options. And this is something that we can say in a very affirming way, that to make the point of how important it is from an equity perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really well put. Okay.
Chair, it's Jeff.
Please, Mr. McKay.
Yes, just 2 points very briefly. I think Mayor Meyer brought up a couple good points there, but one on the NVTC stewardship. For those of us who have been around long enough, we probably remember, I think it was about 10 years ago, where there was a very involved conversation about NVTC, NVTA, NVRC, all of our regional organizations, and there was an attempt to combine some of them for efficiency. And there was a quite involved study analysis that was conducted at that time that pointed out not only some of the practical reasons why that would be hard, but a lot of statutorial problems with doing that as well. And that was frankly before NVTC got entangled in the commuter choice program, which has thickened the agenda quite a bit. And so it might be worthwhile on the stewardship piece to pull out that old study that was done. I think it was at the time during the McDonnell administration when that attempt was made. And there was quite a good reason why that would have made things less efficient and complicated matters for the region. So we're not starting from zero on that. And then secondly, on Mr. Meyer's comment, I applaud the city for looking at fare free bus service. I know in the county, I've asked our staff to look at that, what the economic impact would be. Of course, you have to back out of that some operational savings too, which is the cost of collections and the delays that collections cause. And so as we look to the future, I think that's something relevant that maybe requires a larger regional conversation about how we might be able to work together on that to promote transit. And even if it's not a permanent solution, certainly coming out of the pandemic, it's something I think worth looking at to get people back confident in using transit and understanding its important role. So I think just to give Dave Meyer some feedback on both of those things, I think those are really two really important things and things we should be looking at from a regional standpoint.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Okay.
Yes, please, Mr. Smedberg.
Yes, thank you. Jeff, you made some really good points, and not only the report that was produced a decade or so ago now, but I'm also reminded, and Amy may know more about this, the specifics, but in addition to commuter choice, I believe in one of the state provisions, or one of the bills that came out of the legislature, or Kate may actually know about this, there were some provisions in there that clearly define the role and what they expected from NVTC, which clearly separated the two organizations and elevated NVTC quite a bit. So we might want to have that available and remind folks what the full scope of that was. And that, I think, Jeff, was that like 3 years ago now, I guess, about that? Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please. I'm sorry, I didn't catch who that was. Oh, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, no, this is me. Sorry. Yeah, just quickly, Paul and Jeff and everybody, thank you for the reminder about all the work that's been done. Sometimes I think a lot of work gets done on reports and analyses, and it just gets put on a shelf and everybody forgets and you redo it. So that's very helpful. And I very much want to second or third the remarks about looking at not having fares that David and Jeff made. I'm very supportive of that. I think the idea of having a regional conversation about it is great and would love to participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, Director Mitchell may still be presenting on Long Bridge to PRTC, but I know it was a priority for the administration, and I believe it was deferred, although successful, to try a pilot program for free fare, especially for low-income riders around the Commonwealth. So I don't know if Director Mitchell's with us, but she may be able to speak to it at a later point.
I am here, Katie.
You are. Hello.
Yeah, I've been here for a while. There was a program established in the omnibus bill called the TRIP program, the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, which has allocated some funds for two different things, both establishing regional programs and regional routes of significance, but then also being able to support programs that can support either low fare or no fare programs at transit systems. We are in the process of developing guidelines for that. We'll actually be talking about that at our next TISDAC meeting in November, and we'll be releasing some information publicly as well for public comment. So we expect that to roll out in the next 2 months or so. So certainly be happy to share that with NVTC as that becomes available too. We may not have that program in place after allowing for some time for public comment. We may not have that program in place for the very beginning of FY22, but we are shooting to be able to have applications available later this spring so that we could have a mid-year grant later in, or I should say early in fiscal year 22 for that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I think you're hearing strong interest from the commission and hearing more about how that goes. Thank you. Okay. I might encourage us to move along, actually. Seeing Director Mitchell reminds me that we have a really important topic on our agenda about the passenger rail and the future of the corridor. So I think it may make sense to keep us advancing, but this has been a terrific discussion. And, it's great to see, too, what this commission looks like when we have all of our legislators at full strength. You all are just terrific allies for us and asking great questions. And so I think I can speak for a lot of us locals when I say how much we appreciate having you here. Okay, so just to, I think, wrap up on our last update, Ms. Matthijs, forgive me, you didn't yet cover the annual legislative briefing, right? Did you?
I have not mentioned it at this meeting, but I'm happy to repeat it many, many times over. So indeed, we do have our annual joint NVTC PRTC legislative briefing on Monday, December 7th from 9 to 11. We actually have close to 100 RSVPs already. We are delighted. Secretary Valentine is going to be making it, or sure, she definitely said that if she could not, I know we may see Jennifer Mitchell or Nick Donahue in her place. And of course, Paul Wiedefeld, Rich Dalton, myself, and Bob Schneider. We have made some special invitations to our sitting senators. That would be Senator Warner and Senator Kane. And they just said, check back next week. I wonder why. So we actually are really excited for that program. It is all virtual, so you can participate wherever you are. And so we really look forward to having a good morning discussion about policy at both the federal as well as at the state level.
Thank you very much. We can even try to ship some only moderately stale hotel muffins to your door if that would
there you go.
Bring about the nostalgia of your usual participation. But thank you so much, Ms. Matthijs, and looking forward to that. I think we'll have an opportunity to promote it one last time at our December commission meeting before that takes place. Okay, so let's move then into a VRE update, followed by the promised DRPT update that I mentioned, or excuse me, rather the Passenger Rail Authority update as part of VRE. So let me remind everyone that action item, as I mentioned at the top of the call, regarding the Manassas parking garage has been pulled off our agenda for tonight. I know our VRE team anticipates that's going to come back to us in December. So I'm going to invite Mr. Dalton to give his CEO report to be followed by Elizabeth Bennett Parker, the Vice Chairman of the VRE Operations Board, to introduce the two information items. So Mr. Dalton, up to you for the CEO report.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Commission members and others. You do have the VRE update memo in your packet, so I'll just hit the highlights and just do some updates and stuff there. As we continue to report, we continue to operate at a reduced service level. Our ridership is monitored daily, and of course, as previously reported, we're prepared to add additional cars and up to additional trains in order to maintain a level of social distancing. The public can view the capacity of each of our train via our train utilization webpage. And of course, we continue to manage and enhance the health and safety measures previously implemented system-wide earlier this year. From a ridership perspective, we still continue to slowly increase our average daily ridership through October. we finally crested the 1,400 mark, and that continues to slowly uptick. Again, it's trending in the right direction. We are increasing ridership effectively, one rider at a time. Our on-time performance for October was 94% system-wide. VRE staff continues to work remotely, and all business functions are fully operational as we continue to maintain a continuity of operations. And as mentioned, I'm likely to come back on a couple of these information items, Madam Chair. So with that, that is the end of my report.
Great, thank you. And stay tuned, the information items and our big update on the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. So Ms. Bennett-Parker, if you'd like to introduce our information items to us, that'd be terrific.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The draft 2021 VRE legislative agenda is provided as an information item and will be brought back to the Commission for approval at the December 3rd meeting, following action taken by the Operations Board at its November 20th meeting. The VRE legislative agenda includes state and federal legislative priorities. Our state and priorities include COVID-19 pandemic response, state capital funding, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, meetings held through electronic communications means, NVTA funding, Virginia Transit Association, and transportation authorities. VRE federal funding, legislative and regulatory issues include surface transportation reauthorization, Surface Transportation Board Authority, Amtrak on-time performance, federal grant programs, USDOT rulemaking, liability insurance reform, and COVID-19 relief. And then I think, as we've discussed, VRE staff have been working with the RPT staff on behalf of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority to develop an operating and access agreement allowing VRE to operate on right-of-way owned by the Commonwealth, as well as a passenger rail improvements and funding agreement for VRE contributions to the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. It's anticipated that the Operations Board will take action at its November 20th meeting, with Commission action requested at the December 3rd NVTC and PRTC meetings. And so I'll turn it back to Mr. Dalton to provide more information about the proposed agreements. And he, along with, I think, VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield and VRE Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac are also here to answer questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vice Chair Bennett-Parker. I will point Commission members to, I believe it's attachment 8E, which is the information item or the presentation that we gave at the October 16th VRE Operations Board meeting. That presentation is essentially a little thick, if you will. And so what I would, what I propose to do here is we've distilled down, at least for a discussion, down to 2 slides for you, because the essentially there are 2 agreements that we are working on with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority as it relates to the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. And just real briefly, just to remind folks what that is that was a program announced last December by the governor, where in fact the governor and CSX reached a what's considered just a milestone deal in our industry to acquire a portion of the CSX right-of-way throughout the Commonwealth, but more specifically for VRE service. And so as a byproduct of that pending transaction, we have been working with DRPT staff, specifically Director Mitchell and her team, and of course on the VRE side, myself, our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Schofield, and Legal Counsel, Steve McIsaac, to initiate what's essentially one of the agreements, of course, is the Passenger Rail Operations and Access Agreement. And this is similar to existing access agreements that we have with CSX, Norfolk Southern, Amtrak. It's essentially giving, permitting VRE the ability to access the rail corridor and rail facilities. And of course, it addresses a lot of things as it relates to operations, as the slide here points out, operations, access, and of course that includes fees and station leases. So I'll just stop there for a second. So this agreement, again, not unlike other access agreements, it identifies the operating parameters. And in this case, at least initially, CSX will continue to do dispatching, will continue to do maintenance away, et cetera. But they will do that for the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. And then, of course, we will have a within our agreement access to the portion of the right-of-way that the rail authority acquired through this transaction to effectively be able to operate on those specific segments, if you will, of the corridor. It also includes station leases. Obviously, some of the right-of-way acquisition includes locations where existing station platforms, and this is platforms primarily, in most cases, the parking lots and other ancillary facilities related to a VRE station is outside of the right-of-way. And then the agreement also includes and identifies what these planned improvements are. And I'm going to ask you to just keep that term in mind here for a second, because when we get to infamous slide number 2, we're going to talk about the funding agreement, and the funding agreement ties very specifically to the planned improvements. So, and essentially, as these planned improvements are executed and commissioned, this, by way of that increased infrastructure, there will be increased capacity, and that provides the ability for VRE to operate, which is referred to in the agreement as planned additional service. So again, I point you to the information item, to the some of the specifics there, as Vice Chair Bennett Parker stated before. Our plan is to bring a recommendation back to the VRE Operations Board in November, at our November 20th meeting. So this commission will see this as a recommendation at their, or likely to see it at your December meeting. And before I go to slide number 2, we go to slide number 2. I just want to, I'll say it now and I'll say it again, is that in any case, commission members would like to have one-on-one briefings with either myself or a combination of myself, Mark Schofield, our Chief Financial Officer, Steve McIsaac, and of course, I'll volunteer Director Mitchell to be part of those discussions as well. So why don't we go ahead and switch to the second slide, and I'll ask Mark Schofield to just jump in here real quick, as he is a participant on the call, and just give you just a thumbnail sketch of what we're speaking to as it relates to the passenger rail improvements funding agreement.
Thank you, Rich, and good evening, commission members. I'd be happy to do that. We have been in discussion with Director Mitchell and her team for almost a year now about the structure for VRE to make a substantial contribution to the overall program, the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. And the natural way for us to make that contribution is using the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund that was created by the General Assembly back in 2018. That money, the CROC money, as we call it, is very flexible. It can be used for operating, it can be used for capital on a cash or a pay-go basis, and it can be used actually as the backing for a debt issuance. And so what we've been discussing with DRPT on behalf of the VPRA is a combination of a debt issuance that would be backed by the CROC and a pay-go or a cash contribution. The proceeds of the debt issuance would go to assist VPRA in the initial right-of-way purchase. They have 3 milestone payments that they have to make in order to purchase the right-of-way. We would assist with one or more of the milestone payments using the proceeds of that debt issuance. We would expect that debt issuance to have us committing CROC money for approximately 30 years. But we would not be committing all of the CROC. The remaining amount over just a 10-year period, then we would also commit to VPRA to use on a cash basis, again, to assist in those planned investments that Rich was talking about, and specifically the ones that will have the biggest immediate impact for VRE. So those would be Long Bridge, the Springfield Bypass, and or the new fourth track in and around Alexandria. So we are still sort of hammering out some of the details, some of the legal language. If we are able to get this to where we can all agree, we would begin working immediately on the debt issuance process. This will not be the kind of thing that you can just snap your fingers and do. We will be engaging our bond counsel and our financial advisory team pretty intensely over the next year in order to do that debt issuance. And we certainly will be, one of the very first steps would be actually doing an update of our debt management policies. And that's something that would come before the operations board and the commissions, because when we did that back in 2013, I believe it was, we didn't contemplate anything like doing a debt issuance backed by the CROC. So we would certainly be bringing a lot of information to the operations board and the commissions over the next year if we're able to successfully do this. So with that, Rich, I'll turn it back to you and to the chair, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Mark. I will, again, as I promised, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. I am going to, once again, offer at any point, if any commission members would like a one-on-one briefing with any one of us, a combination of us to go into more detail on this agreement, because again, you'll likely see it here in another month. But if I could, Madam Chair, just because we're on this topic and I brought up Director Mitchell's name before, I would just invite her, if I could, invite her to either add comments or correct myself and or Mark Schofield and where we completely got this thing wrong, if at all.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. And Madam Chair, members of the Commission, we're very pleased that the VRE Operations Board and the commissions are committed to helping us fund this Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. It is a $3.7 billion initiative that does include purchase of CSX right-of-way, as many of you have heard before, as well as construction of the Long Bridge, plus the construction of a number of other infrastructure improvements that will really unlock a lot of new capacity for VRE in the corridor. So this is a really important funding agreement for us. Rich, I think, has done a pretty good job, as well as Mark, in laying out the overall parameters of it, but I'm more than happy to participate in any briefings with you all about this. And it really would be committing about 10 years of the CROC revenues plus a longer term amount for debt service, but we would free up CROC revenues after that 10-year period to be utilized for other things as well. So really appreciate the partnership we've had with Rich, Mark, and his staff, Steve McIsaac, of course, and happy to take any questions you all might have.
All right. Thank you, Director Mitchell, and our CEO, Rich Dalton, as well as Mark Schofield. Certainly there's a lot of details in this presentation, and so I certainly would commend to anyone the opportunity to participate in a briefing to talk either about this agreement or the opportunity presented by the creation of the Passenger Rail Authority, and certainly by the Long Bridge project and related track acquisition and improvements, and how that fits into VRE's System 2040 plan and what it will mean for commuter rail across Northern Virginia. Let me invite any questions now about this agreement that will be coming to us as a parent commission soon, or any other of the VRE content that's been presented.
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, just two quick questions. Is there any financial exposure to NVTC as a result of this agreement, or any debt issuance or any other financial aspect of this?
Madam Chair, if you'd like me to.
I would, Mr. Schofield, please.
Yes, sure. Yes, as most of you probably know, VRE is not a legal entity. We are co-owned and co-operated by the commissions, and the commissions would be the ones doing the debt issuance, not VRE directly. Now, this would be unlike, say, a revenue bond or something where the local jurisdictions that make up the commissions would have an obligation. This would be what you could call sort of a naked pledge of the CROC revenues itself. It would not be reverting back to the jurisdictions.
Okay, I think that'll be something that I'll want to see in writing from perhaps Steve McIsaac or whomever, so that when we take this vote on this, we know that we're not exposing our jurisdictions to any financial risk, either long-term or short-term, as a result of these actions. So I think that'll be fundamental. Is there any danger that the funding to support this would be pulled from other sources of funding that go to our jurisdictions?
So I might invite Mark to talk a little more about the CROC and what it is, which is a relatively new instrument, but it is does not rely on any of our jurisdictional general funds or any other sources. But Mark, do you want to talk in greater detail? This is kind of a newer animal. One that
Absolutely.
I fought desperately to have a hyphen in there, so we weren't calling it the croc, but failed. So.
Well, when we had to write croc back and have a double hyphen, we just lost it there. I'm sorry. So you're right, Madam Chair. This is a relatively new source. It is funded by the regional fuel tax collections in the areas of the two commissions. We have an MOU that is in place that has NVTC being the one that actually manages the CROC on behalf of the two commissions and on behalf of VRE. But there is no recourse to any local jurisdiction money, and there would not be as a part of the debt issuance.
Okay, thank you. Those are the questions I had.
Yeah, they're really important ones. I'm glad you surfaced them. Okay, any others? All right, seeing none. We'll look forward to seeing this before us next month. Certainly it's a little technical, but it is a really big deal and one I'm excited to see come to fruition. Okay, well, I think we would have a pretty natural transition from there over to Director Mitchell for the annual or the monthly DRPT report.
All right, trying to get off mute there. Yes, thank you. And I won't go into a lot of the detail in the about the information that we have already pledged or put in our monthly report that is in your packet. I do want to note that we did bring to CTB a revised 6-year plan budget that will actually be going forward to them for a vote in December. There will also be a public hearing associated with it in November, associated with the November CTB meeting. I believe that's being scheduled for the 24th. However, I do want to note that the amount for FY21, and again, you probably may recall from previous reports that I've given, we only allocated 2 quarters of funding incrementally until we were waiting for new revenue forecasts from the governor's office, which we have. We do expect, as Kate mentioned before, an additional revenue forecast that include FY22 in December. But for the remainder of FY21, we're going to be allocating a total of $173.6 million to NVTC, and that's our yearly operating and capital support that we provide to NVTC for its support to Metro. That's actually an increase of $14.6 million over last year's amount. So the good news is there will be an increase in subsidies, or state support for NVTC subsidies for this fiscal year. We do also have a full $50 million in the budget as well for our annual PREA contribution, as well as $154.5 million for our contribution to the regional dedicated capital funding. The reason for the increase has very much to do with the omnibus bill that was passed in this last General Assembly session. So, of course, we appreciate the support of our General Assembly members there. And so that will be going to the CTB in December. Also, with our statewide operating funds, we're going to be allocating a total amount of $101.6 million, which is slightly above what we allocated in FY20. So I believe that will allocate about $29 million to the transit systems that are supported by the NVTC jurisdictions. That would be the local transit systems as well. As Rich mentioned before, there was an inaugural meeting of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority on October 26th. It was primarily an organizational meeting. We expect to have another meeting in December where we'll present a draft budget and move forward on some other policies and procedures. They did at that meeting authorize the beginning of an executive director search. So we expect to begin that within the next few weeks. And a few other policies and procedures, some other approval bylaws, and some other organizational matters that we needed to get the authority started. So we anticipate meeting primarily monthly over the next year as we are standing up the organization. And we will be giving you many more updates about that as we go along. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell. Any questions on those topics? All right, hearing none, certainly appreciate that good news on the funding side in particular. And congratulations on standing up the VPRA. VPRA.
Thank you.
I know that's been a real undertaking. Okay, before we head into closed session, let me invite Kate to give an executive director report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And indeed, as I always encourage folks to look at our monthly newsletter that I got included in the kit, two things I wanted to highlight from there is that we had a number of staff lead or participate in panels at the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association conference earlier this month, which was just fantastic to highlight some of the work that we're doing, including work on Route 7's BRT, as well as the Commuter Choice Program. And also, I wanted to share, I actually was invited to speak to the Metropolitan Planning Organization down in Tampa Bay, Florida. Well, virtually to them, not in Tampa, specifically because they are talking about express lanes and dynamic tolling in their area. And we're very, very interested in how we've incorporated the multimodal programs and the transit funding piece for commuter choice. So I was really happy to make that morning work and connect with them and answer some questions that they have. So again, we've got lots of other stuff in that newsletter. We also do have, of course, our financial reports, which include through September for you. And of course, once again, I can give the plug for our virtual legislative briefing in just a couple of weeks away. So that is, I guess, one other thing, actually, sorry, I did want to mention is as we're talking about people going back to work, actually, as of today, we have a handful of staff now electing to go back into the office and work. And so we do plan on having sort of a shadow of maybe 4 or 5 staff, 2 to 3 days a week for their choice to be working back in the office. And so we're happy to be able to sort of make that opportunity available for those who wish to do it.
All right. Well, thanks, Kate. And that sounds like a really interesting conversation in Tampa. We'll have to follow that and see if they followed any good lessons that you shared as they proceed with the project. All right. So let me briefly open the floor for any questions for Kate. Hearing none, we now have a closed session. So we are going to be discussing the Executive Director's annual review. For those who may be listening, we do plan to return to open session, and in fact, we'll need to certify. And so those watching will know the YouTube feed will continue with a screen notice that we're in closed session, and that will resume live when we return to open session. Commissioners, if you could remain on this WebEx link, the rest of the staff participating are going to move to a WebEx lobby wait for us to return to open session. I'm going to go ahead and make this motion, which is that pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2, 3711 of the Code of Virginia, that NVTC, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, move to convene a closed session to discuss personnel matters. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to give that, I think, to Mr. Sullivan. And so unless there is any further discussion, all right, let me turn it to Ms. Gilchrist to call the roll for a vote.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Corn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Palchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw. Mr. Stork can vote for Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Motion passes. I turn it back to the chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going to give it just a minute for those following along via the YouTube live stream. I am going to make a motion, colleagues, which is that we certify to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting at the just concluded closed session. 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed, and also that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened were heard or discussed or considered. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Sullivan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, our secretary will call the roll.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker. Ms. Bennett Parker?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Eben had to leave. Ms. Filler-Corn? Aye. Mr. Faust?
Aye.
Ms. Garvey?
Aye.
Mr. Krizik?
Aye.
Mr. McKay?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Ms. Palchik? Ms. Palchik? Mr. Reed?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, was that Ms. Palchik?
It was, I apologize. Aye.
That's okay. Mr. Reed?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Smedberg? Mr. Smedberg? Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you all very much. All right, I do have one other motion to make, which is that the commission authorize an amendment to the executive director's contract to reflect the compensation adjustment discussed in closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you for Mr.
Sullivan.
Sullivan. Great. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, our clerk will call the secretary will call the roll again.
Chair Crystal?
Aye.
Mr. Gary?
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Bell?
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Evans? Ms. Filler-Corn?
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. McKay, Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. All right. And thank you, colleagues. It's been a late evening and I appreciate everyone hanging with me. Unless there is any objection, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you for participating. And I look forward to seeing everybody, at least in 2 dimensions, at our next meeting on December 3rd. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.